Hi, Joan.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Anita, Lorraine, if you have any questions, just do the raise hand thing on the, and I'll take your questions as they come out. So, Joan, could you start by letting us know, I guess, your name, where you were born, and where you grew up, just for a bit of background information.
Sure. My name is Joan Carr. It changed to Joan Richards when I was married, but it's Joan Carr. And I tell you a bit about, I was born in Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. But I'm like Hank Snow. I've lived all over Canada and parts of the United States in my childhood. When I was 6 years old, I lived in Milton, Nova Scotia, and I'd already moved 4 times. So you can imagine it's been uh, I had a very different childhood.
So, when did you end up in the Gaspé, and how long did you live there for?
I lived I lived in the Gaspé twice.
Okay.
I started out on the Magdalen Islands. That's when I first entered Quebec. And I started out on the Magdalen Islands. I was there for 7 years with a break in the middle. And I moved, I was in Murdochville in the middle. And
All right.
1975, I was in Murdochville. And I lived there for 2 years, 3 years. We lived there for 3 years. And then we moved back to the Magdalen Islands. And then in 19, at Christmas 1979, we moved to Grand Cascapedia, which is on the Gaspé. And that was where we stayed until 2000.
Great. How did you get involved with CASA?
Well,
Were you a founding member? Were you
no. In 1975, when I lived in Murdochville, I had a very good friend named Peggy Patterson, and she was one of the founding members. And she got me excited about it because they were planning to produce a newspaper, which was a great interest to me. And so that's the way CASA started, and that's the way I got involved. But I didn't get. I was my son Alan was born in Murdochville, and so I didn't get really involved until I actually moved to Grand Cascapedia. And then one of the other founding members, Mary Campbell, um, wanted to get off of the board, and so I took her place. And that was in 1980.
And how long did you work there? What years did you work at? You were on the board or were you on the staff?
I was on the board in 1980. I typed for the newspaper for the first while. Um, the Spec was the newspaper, and that's the reason CASA was formed originally. And so I typed for Spec. I got very involved very quickly. I went to the first Alliance Quebec convention, and that kind of sealed my involvement. Um, I started to work with them in 1981,
Okay. Until what year?
2000.
Okay. And you're saying initially it was mostly about the newspaper, but was CASA doing other stuff in the early?
No, no. Um, this is how it happened. We were funded by the Secretary of State at that time, and the Secretary of State would not fund a newspaper. So we formed the group CASA. I know that history because I was involved in it, like I said, in 1975. But um, so we formed a group called CASA, Committee for Anglophone Social Action. And then CASA formed a newspaper. And so our funding went into the newspaper for the first, I say about 5 years. It was all about the newspaper and getting the newspaper off the ground and making it work. And so when I came in 1980, CASA had just begun to get involved in the political, if you will, aspects, because the Spec, the newspaper couldn't. So we did, and we got involved in we got involved with Alliance Quebec. Alliance Quebec was forming then, and we got involved with them in, I don't know, was it 82, 81, 82? I don't know. My memory's not that great, but I think it was in 82.
That sounds about right. Yeah. Um, can you tell us a bit about the English speaking community where you grew up, both in Murdochville and well, not where you grew up, but where you lived in
Yes,
Murdochville and in Grand
sure,
Cascapedia and in the Gaspé in general?
sure.
What were some of the issues there in the late 70s, early 80s that you were both reporting on in the newspaper and addressing politically?
Well, there was 25,000 people, 25,000 Anglophones on the Gaspé, and they were spread out all over the Gaspé. They were from Scumanak way up to Murdochville. We had a really wide. They were disparate. They were not all together in one place. And so the Spec brought it together, and we started looking at the conditions, looking at the situation of the English-speaking people on the Gaspé. And when we started doing that, we got involved in health and social services. Education was being threatened at that time. It was they were talking about demolishing the school boards or something like that. I'm not clear on that. It's not my forte, but so CASA started lobbying and started getting involved in that kind of thing. That we worked very hard on trying to procure services for the Anglophone people in their language. That was not happening. Health and social services was abysmal. There was a lot of people didn't understand, what they were, their situation. They didn't understand how their health. They couldn't. The doctors weren't speaking to them in English. The nurses weren't speaking to them in English, and so it was very hard. And the elderly were the most vulnerable. So we started lobbying the government to provide services in English. We started we joined with Alliance Quebec. That was the beginning of getting involved really politically. Alliance Quebec was formed originally, or what the original premise of Alliance Quebec was so that they would bring all the English-speaking people together, and we would speak with one voice, and Alliance Quebec would be that voice. But it didn't happen that way. It wasn't that way. We soon found out that Alliance Quebec was a Montreal-based organization. When we went to the founding meeting, we realized that CASA had to get more involved and be more outspoken. I was at the Alliance Quebec meeting, and we went into the health and social service workshop, Roy Allman and myself, and every time they were talking about policy, they used the phrase "where numbers warrant." There should be services where numbers warrant.
Right.
Well, on the Gaspé, we would never get a service if that was the criteria. So that's when CASA really took off. That's when we really started talking for ourselves, and we really became a force to be reckoned with. We were the first English-speaking organization in Quebec. We were the first. CASA was the, I don't know what would trial balloon. And we became the first organization. We started several others. We worked with townshippers to start them. We worked with the VEC, and we worked with the Lower North Shore. The Lower North Shore, and we've CASA has stayed very close to the Lower North Shore because we share a lot of their isolation and insulation. So it was really easy to work with the Lower North Shore. We started one in Baie-Comeau. Forget where else, but anyway, the townshippers, and we all started working together very well. But then things changed. Things changed over the years, but I think we did what needed to be done at the time.
Okay, we'll go through some of those changes. Lorraine, you have a question. I see you have got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Jill, excuse me, Joan, just going back a bit, you said you were really excited when you heard about Spec getting off the ground. Why, how come?
Because like I told you, that there were so many communities that we didn't even know each other. We didn't even interact. The only time the school board held us together, right? The school board was the group that had the English language school board in the Gaspé was situated in New Carlisle. And it was their dream. It was Lyndon Bescherves. He was the adult education director at that time. And he was the one who said, look, we're not talking to each other. We don't know each other. But when the Spec started and when we got the stringers, we found out a lot about each other. And we found out that we had those same concerns. We had those same victories, if you will. And we became more cohesive as an English language group. And that's why the excitement was around the fact that we were becoming a real, I don't know, cohesive, that's the only word I can think of, community.
And Joan, apologies for having my camera off, but why was that exciting? Like, did you feel that things were isolated before, or
Oh, yes. Yes.
I would like to have a better picture of what it was like to live in Gaspé in the 70s prior to the Spec. Like, what was like life for English speakers?
Well, we were insulated, not isolated. We were insulated. Like, for example, the only time we ever interacted was with sports teams. We'd hear that the Gaspé had won the basketball tournaments that they had around the coast. But the only thing that we had, I don't know how to put that. The only news we got was out of the schools, and then when the Spec came in, we got news from people who did quilting. We got news. We shared. It was almost like an enormous WI. We shared meals, recipes. We shared common interests. We realized that there was a lot of us out there that had a lot in common, and that it was that commonality that was just so needed. We had our churches. And so there were different churches in different areas, and so they got together, but only about once a year, maybe twice a year, and so that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. The Spec, it really drew us together. It really did. And
Thanks so much.
And as far as the political situation, we didn't know anything. Like the CBC, we had CBC, and we loved the local flair of the CBC. It came out of Quebec City, and we had what is it? Good Morning Quebec. What was it? Quebec AM. We had Quebec AM, and everyone tuned into that. And so when Spec got going and the CBC stringers, as they were called, I was a CBC stringer in the Magdalen Islands, so that kind of got me into Quebec. That kind of, in the Magdalen Islands, you were certainly not feeling in Quebec. You were feeling out there, but I was anyway. And not, I shouldn't have said that. Then we should scrap that. But I felt isolated out there, and the CBC brought it to us. You know what I mean? And then before I even got to the Gaspé, I got my first Spec, and so I got to know the Gaspé through Spec.
That's great.
How was Spec set up? Were there reporters in every kind of
Yeah,
municipality in the Gaspé, and you would talk to each other?
well, uh, I talked to each other. Spec had a board, had their own board. Now, at first, CASA was their board, but we couldn't stay that way and speak out. So we had to distance ourselves from Spec. And Spec had its own board. And that board was made up of members from each community. You
Okay.
know, and CASA's board was made up of members from each community. So we got together every month. And that was another thing that was really, sometimes it was trying. Sometimes it was, there was a pull and a tug from the different communities. They had their needs and we had our needs, and sometimes they didn't jive. And so we had to deal with. But for the most part, you scratch a Gaspésian, they're gonna bleed Gaspésian. They're not gonna bleed Escuminac and Gaspé and New Carlisle. They're gonna bleed Gaspésian, and that's probably an ugly analogy, but it's true. It's well,
So what were some of the big issues for the English speaking community in the Gaspé? You mentioned kind of access to health and social services. What were some of the issues, and how did CASA kind of address these issues, and what were the outcomes of some of these actions?
well, we had thanks. That was where Alliance Quebec came in handy. They really did, because they would bring us together. We would go into Montreal, and they would bring us together. We would bring our issues, they would bring their issues, and we'd all talk about them. And when we did that, we would form committees. Like Russ Williams was the MP or member of the National Assembly at that time, and he was an Anglophone, and he sort of spearheaded the issues that we were facing. The issue of I'll just give you an example. In the X-ray room, they had this big sign that said, "If you are pregnant, tell the technician." It was in French. It was not in English,
Right.
and nobody said it. I'll give you another example. We had we didn't have a resident psychiatrist on the coast. We had a locum, or somebody that came in once a month for 3 days, usually in Gaspé, to see the people who needed psychiatric help. The man spoke, well, the one that I thought about was, he spoke only English or only French, and his first language was English, but he spoke only French because he wasn't allowed, or he wasn't permitted. That was a rule. And so it wasn't right. And then when they finally got someone, we finally got the right, they sent in a French only speaking psychiatrist who called in the person who mopped the floors to translate for him. So it was those kinds of things that were just so obnoxious and so egregious. It was a time when it pulled us away. It really isolated us when
Right.
we realized that we were not going to get the services we needed. So that's when Law 142. That's when we started fighting Law 142, and we got it. It took us a long way out of that. But I see now. We won't go into what I see now, but because you haven't asked me, but that's kind of rolled back. It's not as good as it was.
Right. Can you give me some examples of some of the victories that you've mentioned some of the negative situations. Were there any victories that CASA managed to win in some of these cases?
We won the victory. The health and social services was our victory. It was a good victory.
Mhm.
We won a moratorium on aerial spraying that wasn't being fought. and that we took up. We had loyalist days that just absolutely bloomed. I mean, it took a year to organize, and we had, and it was in 1986, 200 years of the loyalists on the Gaspé, and we had those days, and we had the biggest victory was that we became a community. We became a real community because of CASA, because of the concerted effort by everyone to become a community. That's our victory.
Tell us a bit about Alliance Quebec. Now, you said, they were helpful at times, they were less helpful at other times. Did the relationship change over the years? Was it
Oh,
easier
yeah.
in the 80s? Was it?
It had to change. It had to change because they had a wonderful idea. The idea was stellar, but the application was it just hit the floor. They would have Quebec Community Groups Network was formed because Alliance Quebec could not answer the need for every community to be served. It couldn't answer that need because they didn't understand. The leadership in Alliance Quebec were wonderful people. They really were. I have, I would not take one thing from them. The design was a good design, but it didn't satisfy the issues. It just didn't, because they didn't understand and they tried, and I know they tried. They came out to CASA and they really tried. They came out to the Gaspé and really tried to get us to listen to what they had to say, but it just didn't work. We needed to be a group where everybody's voice was as loud. And Alliance Quebec, the Montreal voice, and the Quebec City voice was louder.
Right. How did the situation like you've begun talking about this, but how did the situation of the Gaspé English-speaking community change in your lifetime? Now, you say CASA helped bring a lot of it together. How did that change in the 80s and 90s?
The referendums. The referendums was what changed CASA, which changed the Gaspé, which changed the people. It polarized us. The two referendums. That's we had, like I told you, when we began, we had 25,000 people. I think right now, we're below 6,000. I don't know. I'd have to ask my son, who took my place. But I don't know how many are on the Gaspé. I don't know what the statistic is now. But when I first went there, we were a flourishing community. We really did. We really were. And we were a force to be reckoned with. But now, I mean, I'm just going to, I'll talk about the referendums if you don't mind. The first one, I wasn't there. First one was in 1976, I think.
1980 was the first referendum.
Pardon?
1976 is when the PQ got elected, and 1980 was the first referendum.
Okay, so I was there. Yeah. But I wasn't involved. It didn't hit me as hard because I didn't think anything would happen, and everyone felt that same way. Everyone felt nothing's going to change. Not on the Gaspé. It can't change. Gaspésians are Gaspésians, but it did. It took people neighbors who were friends, French and English and Indigenous people on the Gaspé were like this. But when they got to the Cégeps, and when the machine that we called it got to the kids, they got to the young people, it's just fired them up. And as a result, it fired up their families. And as a result, you had this dichotomy where they were pulling apart instead of working together. And in the Gaspé, you can't afford to do that. you know, we're isolated enough without isolating us again. And so a lot of people, there was a great exodus of English people. They're not going to do this. They're not doing this to us. We're leaving. And they did. And the young people didn't come back. We sent a young person out to university or college, and they got a feeling of being respected and cared about. They're going to stay there. They're going to go to New Brunswick. They're going to go to, they're in a West, you know, all of those things. It was a terrible time. And then we started healing. We just started healing. And CASA was very much a part of that healing. We started working with the French, you know, like a CEGEP, or not CEGEP, Sandekai, you know, the health centers. We started working with them. We started going in, and we started, and we got on their boards, and we, you know, we started healing. Then they pulled another referendum on us. And that was the worst thing that happened to the English-speaking people of the Gaspé. It was demoralizing. It was hard. I mean, I was right involved in that one. And I would go to different communities, and I'd tell them, you know, what do you expect is going to happen after the referendum? And you'd get all these, oh, we're going to be better. It's going to be better for all of us, you know. And anyway, I'll tell you, I really believed in Quebec. I love Quebec. I've lived there the longest I've ever lived in my life. And I really, really believed in the people of Quebec. But that referendum it broke my heart. And it broke the heart of a lot of people on the Gaspé. Because I remember going to church. The referendum took place on a Monday. And I remember going to church, and I was standing in the choir, and the minister said, perhaps we should sing "O Canada," because we might not be able to do that tomorrow. And and that's what happened. Anyway, so CASA changed. It had to change. It changed its dynamic then. It started to change. It started to, at one point, we were an social action organization, looking for the government to provide our services for us, looking to the government to give us, to make us feel at home. We had to do that for ourselves. And I think that the new CASA, the CASA that's there today, is doing that. I think they're giving, they're providing services which we never were. We were never a service organization. We weren't supposed to be. That wasn't our raison d'etre. It wasn't our reason for being. It was, so now, moving up, we organized another group called SEDEC, you know, an economic group that CASA and the community groups all organized. I was one of the founding members of that. I was one of the people on that board. I was the vice president of the board at one point. And that we realized, if we're gonna stay here, and if we're gonna live here, we're gonna have to start taking our own place. You know what I mean? We needed to be visibly and economically and socially and politically and everything. We needed to be recognized. We needed to be, instead of trying to be a Quebecer, I shouldn't say this, and I probably shouldn't. No, I'm not gonna. But we weren't so much Quebecers, we're Gaspésians. And that's sad, because being part of Quebec is the begin all end all.
Can you tell me a bit more about how CASA worked with Francophones over the years?
That it's been a love-hate relationship with Gaspésians, Francophones, there is no problem, none at all. I can tell you, the neighbors are neighbors, and there's been it's evolved in one way, because there was a time when they wouldn't intermarry, for example. You know, there was this thing that you stayed in your own group, but now it's not that way. It wasn't that way when I was there. My neighbors were French, my neighbors were English. It didn't matter. They were all my neighbors, and we all interacted together. The Indigenous population as well. I mean, there's a if you wanted to get a ideal community, you'd get the Gaspé, because it's ideal. All of those two solitudes or three solitudes or whatever they're symbiotic. They really get along well. We need each other. We're isolated out there. You know, we need each other. In winter time, we need other more. And we lost the train. That was that was a real hit. We lost the train, and that train connected us to the rest of Quebec. We don't even have, we have a plane, we have the Bonaventure, Air Bonaventure, and we have Air Gaspé. And they're tiny planes, and but the train, and the prices that it was, not the prices that it is now, but the train was so valuable to us. It really was. And when we lost that was a kick in the head. That was hard. But I'm just saying that if you ask me how the Gaspé interacts with how the English people interact with the French people, we interact with Gaspésians, and there's the difference.
Right. So everyone's a Gaspésian regardless of language, right?
We're Gaspé first. Gaspé first. Yeah.
Lorraine, Anita, do you guys have any questions to add?
Yeah, I could add something, but go ahead, Anita.
Well, I was just wondering about the train. If you could elaborate on that. What exactly happened? Why was it taken away? When did it happen?
Well, there was not the will. There was not the will of CN. I like to blame the government, because I blame them for everything. You know, I do, and I shouldn't, but it wasn't so much the government, it was CN. They lost, they started to pull back. I'll tell you, when I was working at CASA, I would go into Montreal twice a month, maybe, or Quebec City, Montreal twice, Quebec City once. I mean, I was always traveling by train, and I loved it. And it made sense. It made all kinds of sense, financially and logistically. Okay, because I'd leave Gaspé at 6 o'clock at night, and I'd get on the train, and I'd have my supper, and then we'd get into Montreal at 8:30. I'd go to my meetings, and if I didn't have 2-day meetings or 3-day meetings, I'd come home on a night train. I'd get on that train at 6 o'clock at night, and I'd come home. You know, everybody did it. The school board did it. The health and social service people, the social workers, and the people that needed to go into Montreal, everybody did it. We made a lot of great friends, and anyway, it was a boon to the Gaspé. Now I understand, in they can correct me if I'm wrong, they're building those the wind power, and they're building them, and so they need to bring the train back to take those wings, or whatever they're called, the fins or whatever they're called. They have to bring them. They're refurbishing the track. So we're hoping, or I'm hoping, I'm living here in PEI, but I know I'm hoping, as along with every Gaspesian, that they'll reinstitute the passenger train, because the passenger train was the thing. You know, if you got on a plane, just think about this. If somebody is sick and has to be air taken out by air, they go to Bonaventure and they get on a plane there. That plane is like a milk run. It stops every whip, stitch, and turn to pick up all their passengers and make it viable to get to Quebec City. That person who's on that plane that's really sick has to stay on that plane and up and down until they get to Quebec City. If they went on a train, they'd get in a bedroom and away they'd go, and they'd be there in the morning. It's just makes all kinds of sense. That's all. That's what the train was for us.
Thank you.
Just going back a bit, you mentioned that CASA at the beginning was very much about kind of producing spec, and also in the early 80s began to do lobbying, and then later on became more of a service provision organization. So, you know, doing the SADC stuff, the employability stuff, and working with SADC for employability, and also working with health and social services. When did that change exactly?
After the referendum,
The second referendum.
people began to realize, if they're not going to do it for us, we're going to do it for ourselves. And that's what they've done. And if you saw CASA now, compare CASA to when I was there. I mean, I felt when I look at it, I feel like a failure, but I'm not, because we were not what they are now. I had to hold a line on that, because that was our policy statement. We did not provide services for the English-speaking people. We fought to get those services provided to the English-speaking people. There was a difference. There's a whole difference. Now, we have a translator who goes into the hospital and takes them through that health maze. We have a library. We have a mobile library. We have I'm saying we, and forgive me, but I still feel it's we. They have these health symposiums for the seniors. We built two seniors residences. And that was in the 1980s, I guess. But that was through we did that through the government. We did. We built a seniors residence in New Richmond. We built one in New Carlisle, the Richmond Manor and the Gilker residence, and they were built totally by the English-speaking people. Now they're having difficulty financially, and the government's stepping in, and so it's no longer an English language institution, it's a bilingual institution. But anyway, we did it. And we knew we met a need, a very big need. And how it's changed, that I just got a call not long ago that the home in Richmond has changed from taking in anyone who's English to taking in low income, and it's becoming the last 10 people that went in there are francophones. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but that's not the way it started. It started for everyone. Now, a person who has a big pension is not going to be able to go in there. Simple. That's the way it's changed.
Right.
Things are changing.
We've gone through the questions. I have another question, and you don't have to answer. It's about Vision Gaspé Pessé now. When did that come about, and why did it come about?
Yeah, I can answer that. don't know whether that's the best thing that happened, but I understand that it's working. There was a lot of feeling in the Gaspé proper, in Gaspé proper, what we call it. There was a lot of feeling that their voice wasn't being heard loud enough, and that might be true. I don't know. I didn't think it was. They were on the board like everybody else, but they were not happy. And so they just decided that they wanted to do this. But CASA seems to be working very well with them. They seem to be getting along very well. Like they have every year, CASA organizes the Magdalen Islands, New Carlisle, and Vision Gaspé. They organize this get together of all the workers that work in all those areas in like in the Gaspé and in the Magdalen Islands. They have a CAMI, the Committee for Anglophone Magdalen Islanders, and Vision Gaspé, and they come together and they go to a place and they go to a retreat and they talk about their prouds and sorries, what they are proud of that happened this year, what needs to happen, what, you know, can we help you? Can you help us? This is the kind of thing. They have a give and take. I hear it's working. I wasn't for it, but I just felt that it was divisive, and it was. But apparently now they've found a meeting place, or a meeting point anyway.
How was CAMI organized? There was a board, and were there staffers in the early years?
CASA organized CAMI. They were under CASA first.
Yeah, but how was CASA organized as an organizer? You had a board. Did you have any staff in the early years, or was it all volunteer based?
All volunteer. Oh, not all volunteer based. No, there was a secretary. From what I was a coordinator first, and then I became executive director. But there was a secretary there at the beginning. I think they got like $8,000 a year or something. That was all. That mostly volunteers. Oh, not the newspaper. The newspaper we had an editor and a typist and that kind of thing.
So you became executive director of CASA?
Yeah.
What years were you executive director? Roughly.
I was executive director. I was coordinator for an awful long time because I was a woman, and I won't even go into that. But I was coordinator for maybe 5 or 6 years, and so I started working in about 83, 84. Yeah, 83, 84. And I was coordinator for maybe 7 or 8 years, and then I became executive director.
So I want to know, Joan, more about how it was that AQ, you said they tried really hard. They had a great vision. They had good leadership, but they just couldn't understand. Can you tell me more about that?
I don't know. I don't know. I'll tell you, when we, like I said at the early set, we had great hopes for Alliance Quebec, because we knew that it would draw everybody in. This is what CASA did, and now this was on a global level. This was on a provincial level, and we thought, oh yeah, this is going to work. And then we went into the first convention, and it kept this stupid phrase where numbers weren't, kept coming up and coming up. And no matter what we said, they would sort of go, oh yeah. It was sort of like a pat in the head. And we knew they weren't taking us seriously. And so we said, look, we'll stake with you. We did. We stuck with them. I don't know how long it was. I can't remember, but we stuck with them, and we did. But every time we went in, we had an argument. Every time, somebody was stepping on somebody else's toes, And it was a lot to do with funding. The funding was all coming from Canadian Heritage. Canadian Heritage was saying, why can't you work with you people? Why can't you work? You know, and they were having their own issues. And so anyway, finally, we called it quits. Finally, we just said, we'll talk to you on the phone. You know, let's be friends. Because we were friends. We were good friends. We had some really good people there. And anyway, we had Health and Social Services. We stuck with them quite closely because the people from VEC and the people from Lower North Shore and us, we were kind of like the CASA, us being CASA, we were kind of like the touchstone there. We were kind of, we had issues that Montreal would never have because of the big hospitals they had and all that. They didn't have those issues. So we kind of, out in the boondocks there, we kind of hung together. The only thing that I want to add is, I think CASA today is a very, very different kettle of fish than the vision of CASA. When we started CASA, we didn't think that we were going to be needed, really. We didn't think we were going to be needed more than maybe 10 years. We thought we would wear out our usefulness. And instead of that, we became essential. Has become essential.
And in what ways is it essential to the Gaspé, according to you?
It keeps our community alive. It keeps it helps our community. Like and another example, what they're doing now is, we didn't have computers at that time, or we had some, but we didn't have computers like they have now. And so we have a computer guru that goes to seniors places and shows them how to use their computers. And we have and not just seniors, but they have a what is it called, a early childhood training program, you know, and we have a flea market. I mean, we have now there's this flea market that we have, and we have the what's it called? It's a music program. There's a thing that they have on the internet, and it's like gangbusters. It's going like gangbusters. We have different programs every whip, stitch, and turn. Somebody's doing a program, and we've got our own radio station, or not radio station. What is it called? It's like a sounds. They've got a whole radio technology down in the basement, and they can do TV and they can do radio, and in the basement of the CASA offices. It's just amazing. And all of those things have changed. And we've got a store where we have CASA memorabilia or souvenirs and stuff like that. And we encourage the artists in the Gaspé. We did that in the early days too. You remember Tennyson Johnson? I don't know, maybe you don't, but he's a famous artist, and his house burned down. So CASA stepped in and wouldn't help him build his house back up, but bought him all the things that would reignite his art. And we bought him all the art supplies and everything to get him going again. That's the kind of thing we did. We're a community. What can I say?